19th century Europe considered itself moral. People believed they lived in an age of reason, order, and piety. They built universities, printed books, and spoke about duty and humility. They taught children to be modest, obedient, and patient. Suffering was declared noble. Humility was called a virtue. Compliance was seen as a sign of high morality. But one man saw not elevation in this, but fatigue. Friedrich Nietzsche looked at European morality the way a doctor looks at a patient. He did not hate it, he diagnosed it. And the diagnosis was harsh. Civilization had learned to justify weakness. Not physical weakness. Spiritual weakness. He saw how people hid behind the word humility, when in fact they were afraid to act. How they spoke of virtue, when what they truly felt was envy. How they praised patience because they could not afford strength. Nietzsche sensed something crucial. Man had stopped wanting to be powerful. He had started wanting to be right. And this became the turning point. The birth of the victim position. No one is born a victim. A child does not know what helplessness is. He wants, demands, tries, falls, and rises again. He does not interpret his failures as proof of his own worthlessness. But gradually, society begins to shape caution within him. At first it looks like care. Don't take risks. Don't stand out. Be like everyone else. Don't do anything foolish. Then comparison appears. Someone is better. Someone is more successful. Someone is stronger. And instead of awakening the desire to grow, comparison often produces resentment. If a person is not taught how to transform this resentment into movement, it turns into ressentiment, a word Nietzsche used to describe accumulated, suppressed bitterness. This is not open aggression. It is quiet, slow dissatisfaction with the world. And here the victim begins to form. A victim is not someone who has suffered. A victim is someone who has made suffering their identity. This subtle distinction goes unnoticed by most people. The comfort of powerlessness. The victim position is psychologically comfortable. It frees one from responsibility. If the world is guilty, you do not need to change. If your parents are guilty, you do not need to grow up. If the system is guilty, you do not need to take risks. A person begins to explain his immobility through circumstances. I can't because. I don't have because. They didn't give me, therefore. Every because becomes a brick in the wall. Nietzsche saw in this not tragedy, but habit. People grow accustomed to explaining themselves through external causes. Gradually, they stop seeing themselves as a source of strength. And the more often a person explains his weakness through outside factors, the more he convinces himself of his dependence. Thus the psychological structure of the victim is formed. The morality of the weak. One of Nietzsche's most radical conclusions was the division of morality into two types: master morality and slave morality. Master morality is born from an excess of strength. A person feels power and defines values based on it. Slave morality is born from resentment. A person cannot act, and therefore reinterprets action itself. The strong say, "This is good because it expresses my strength." The weak say, "This is bad because I cannot do it." Thus a reverse system of values is created. Ambition is declared pride. Confidence becomes arrogance. The desire for excellence becomes selfishness. And gradually society begins to glorify moderation not because it is virtuous, but because it is safe. Nietzsche did not call for the oppression of others. He called for the end of self-oppression. But that required inner courage. Pain as a matter of interpretation. Suffering is inevitable. Loss is inevitable. Disappointment is inevitable. The question is not whether pain can be avoided. The question is what you will do with it. The victim makes pain proof of helplessness. The strong make pain material for growth. This is not romanticizing suffering. It is reevaluating one's relationship to it. Nietzsche himself suffered from severe migraines, near blindness, nervous breakdowns, and profound loneliness. He did not speak about pain as a theorist. But he refused to allow suffering to become justification. And that is where strength begins. The first inner break. Every person eventually faces a moment when the world does not meet his expectations. Betrayal. Failure. Rejection. Loss. At that moment, a crossroads appears. The first path. The world is unfair, I will retreat. The second path. The world is unfair, I will become stronger. Most choose the first. Because the second demands inner work. It demands acknowledging that despite injustice, one still has a choice. And choice is always tied to responsibility. There comes a moment in every life when the question can no longer be avoided. Why am I like this? Most people answer it by pointing outward. Because of my parents. Because of my childhood. Because of society. Because of betrayal. Because of injustice. And sometimes they are right. Life can be brutal. Circumstances can wound deeply. Systems can limit. People can destroy trust. But Nietzsche was not interested in who was right. He was interested in who was powerful. And power, in his philosophy, began at the exact moment a person stopped asking who was guilty, and started asking what was possible. The hidden addiction to blame. Blame feels strong. When a person accuses, he feels morally elevated. He feels awake. Aware. Superior in judgment. Blame creates a temporary illusion of control. It gives narrative clarity. There is a villain. There is a victim. The story makes sense. But that clarity comes at a cost. Blame locks the person inside reaction. If someone else is responsible for your condition, then your condition depends on them. If they change, you improve. If they do not, you remain stuck. This is the quiet prison of victimhood. Nietzsche saw that modern morality often encouraged this structure. It rewarded complaint. It celebrated grievance. It sanctified suffering when it was accompanied by accusation. But accusation does not build strength. It builds dependency. And dependency, even when morally justified, is weakness. The fear behind helplessness. At the core of the victim position lies something deeper than injustice. It is fear. Fear of freedom. To accept full responsibility for one's life, even for the parts one did not choose, is terrifying. It means standing alone. It means there is no final excuse. It means there is no ultimate rescuer. It means the weight is yours. Nietzsche believed most people unconsciously prefer limitation over freedom. Limitation provides structure. It provides explanation. It provides safety. Freedom provides uncertainty. When a person says, "I cannot because of them," he narrows the world. He defines the boundaries of his possibility. When he says, "Despite them, what can I do?" he opens the world. But opening the world requires courage. And courage requires accepting anxiety. Responsibility for the unchosen. One of Nietzsche's most radical psychological ideas is simple and brutal. You are responsible not for what happened to you, but for what you make of it. This does not deny injustice. It transcends it. Two individuals can experience the same trauma. One builds identity around it. The other builds strength from it. The event is identical. The interpretation is not. An interpretation shapes destiny. Victimhood says, "This happened to me. Therefore I am limited." Strength says, "This happened to me. Therefore I must become greater." The shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because in the second case, the person remains the author. Nietzsche insisted that meaning is not discovered, it is created. Life does not come with built-in justification. It demands construction. If you do not construct meaning from your suffering constructs you. The discipline of self-ownership. Responsibility is not an emotional outburst. It is a discipline. It requires observing oneself without self-pity. It requires brutal honesty. It requires asking uncomfortable questions. Where am I lying to myself? Where am I hiding behind excuses? Where am I shrinking to avoid risk? The victim avoids these questions. They threaten identity. If your identity is built around being wrong, then growth feels like betrayal of your own story. Improvement feels like minimizing past pain. But strength demands reinterpretation. Nietzsche spoke of self-overcoming, the constant process of surpassing one's previous form. Not once. Not dramatically. But repeatedly. Self-overcoming begins when a person says, "I will not let my past define the ceiling of my future." That sentence sounds empowering. Living it is exhausting. Because it removes comfort. The death of excuses. Excuses are subtle. They rarely sound cowardly. They sound reasonable. "I'm not ready. It's not the right time. I need better conditions. I would, but..." Each of these sentences protects the ego from exposure. To act is to risk failure. To risk failure is to risk proof of inadequacy. So the mind invents postponement. Victimhood thrives in postponement. Strength thrives in action. Nietzsche did not glorify reckless behavior. He glorified will. The will to expand. The will to confront. The will to test oneself against resistance. Without resistance, there is no growth. Without friction, no sharpening. A person who avoids responsibility avoids resistance, and therefore avoids growth. The burden that liberates. Paradoxically, responsibility feels heavy at first, and liberating later. When a person finally accepts that he is the primary force shaping his life, even within limits, something changes internally. Energy returns. Blame drains energy outward. Responsibility concentrates energy inward. Instead of analyzing who caused the damage, the individual begins asking how to rebuild. Instead of waiting for apology, he constructs capacity. This is not coldness. It is sovereignty. Nietzsche's philosophy is often misread as cruel. In reality, it demands extraordinary strength of spirit. It does not offer comfort. It offers power. And power, unlike comfort, requires cultivation. The internal battlefield. The transition from victim to strength does not happen publicly. It happens internally. There is a battle between two voices. The first voice whispers, "It's not your fault. You deserve sympathy." The second voice says, "It may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility." The first voice feels kind. The second voice feels harsh. But the first voice keeps you small. The second voice forces you to grow. Nietzsche believed growth often feels like cruelty toward one's own weaknesses. Not self-hatred, but refusal to indulge fragility. This is where many retreat. Because strength requires confronting the parts of oneself that prefer comfort over power. The psychological shift. The true transformation begins when a person stops identifying with what happened to him and starts identifying with what he can become. Identity shifts from passive to active. Instead of saying, "I am someone who was hurt," the person begins to say, "I am someone who transforms pain." This subtle shift alters posture, tone, behavior, decisions. Opportunities once invisible become visible. Risks once terrifying become tolerable. Responsibility sharpens perception. Victimhood dulls it. The second lesson? Thus the second lesson emerges clearly. Stop looking for who is to blame. Start asking what you can build. Blame freezes time. Responsibility creates motion. You may not control the past. You may not control others. But you control interpretation. You control response. You control effort. And effort, repeated long enough, changes position. Nietzsche did not promise happiness. He promised intensity. Expansion. Height. To become strong is not to eliminate pain. It is to stop kneeling before it. And the moment a person stands, even trembling, he has already stepped out of victimhood. If responsibility is the first fracture in the structure of victimhood, risk is the first true test of strength. Many people accept responsibility in theory. They agree with the idea. They nod at the philosophy. They even repeat the language of growth and power. But when the moment comes to act, they hesitate. Because action introduces risk. And risk threatens identity. The comfort of safety. The victim position is not only built on blame. It is also built on safety. Safety in predictability. Safety in limitation. Safety in staying within familiar boundaries. There is a strange comfort in knowing your limits, even if those limits are painful. A confined life can feel stable. You know what to expect. You know what you will not attempt. You know where you will not fail. But strength cannot grow in safety alone. Nietzsche believed life itself is expansion. Every living organism strives to increase its power, to push beyond previous forms. To resist growth is to resist life. Yet humans do something peculiar. They rationalize stagnation. They say, "I'm being realistic. I'm just practical. I don't want to risk disappointment." But beneath realism often hides fear. And beneath fear, the instinct to preserve comfort over potential. The fear of exposure. Risk exposes. When you attempt something beyond your current capacity, you reveal your limits. You invite possible failure. You risk humiliation. For the victim mindset, this is intolerable. Because the victim identity relies on external causes. If you fail while trying, the failure becomes personal. It can no longer be blamed solely on circumstance. It becomes evidence of your present weakness. So the mind invents protection. It suggests waiting, preparing longer, gathering more certainty. avoiding the arena altogether. Nietzsche despised this self-protection when it became habitual. He believed a person must test himself against resistance. Without testing, one never discovers strength. You do not become strong by theorizing about courage. You become strong by risking embarrassment, defeat, rejection. The battlefield is not always dramatic. Often it is ordinary, speaking honestly, starting something uncertain, confronting conflict, choosing ambition over approval. Each act of risk chips away at victimhood. The necessity of discomfort. Strength is forged in discomfort. Comfort maintains the present self. Discomfort challenges it. When you choose the safe path repeatedly, your identity stabilizes. You become predictable, even to yourself. You know what you will not attempt. You know what conversations you will avoid. You know what dreams you will quietly abandon. This predictability feels calm. But it slowly suffocates growth. Nietzsche saw comfort as seductive. Not evil, but dangerous when it becomes the highest value. If comfort becomes the goal, strength becomes optional. And if strength becomes optional, dependency increases. Risk interrupts this pattern. It forces adaptation. It forces learning. It forces humility without humiliation, because you chose the challenge. The victim avoids discomfort to preserve ego. The strong endure discomfort to expand capacity. Risk as self-definition. When a person risks voluntarily, something profound happens internally. He declares, "My growth matters more than my comfort." That declaration shifts identity. No longer defined by past wounds, he becomes defined by chosen trials. Every risk taken, even if unsuccessful, reinforces agency. Even failure becomes evidence of action. There is dignity in attempted ascent. Nietzsche respected struggle more than stability. He believed that tension, difficulty, and confrontation with limits are not signs of misfortune, they are signs of life. A person who never risks never discovers where his true edge lies. And without discovering your edge, you remain smaller than your potential. The psychology of avoidance. Avoidance is subtle. It rarely announces itself as fear. It disguises itself as logic. I'll wait until I feel confident. I need more certainty. I don't want unnecessary stress. But confidence does not precede action. It follows it. Certainty rarely arrives before movement. It emerges through movement. The victim mindset waits for perfect conditions. The strong create momentum in imperfect conditions. Nietzsche understood that life does not reward passivity. It responds to force. Not force against others, but force of will. The will to attempt. The will to step forward despite trembling. The will to endure discomfort long enough for growth to occur. The third lesson. Thus the third lesson becomes clear. Choose risk over safety. Not reckless risk. Not destruction. But deliberate confrontation with what you avoid. Speak when silence protects you. Attempt when doubt restrains you. Advance when fear advises retreat. Each of these moments reshapes your nervous system. You begin to associate movement with possibility instead of danger. Victimhood thrives on stagnation. Strength thrives on expansion. And expansion always contains uncertainty. The transformation of fear. Fear itself is not the enemy. Fear is information. It signals the boundary between present identity and potential identity. When fear appears, the victim interprets it as a stop sign. When fear appears, the strong interpret it as a doorway. This interpretation makes all the difference. To eliminate fear is impossible. To move through it is transformative. Nietzsche believed greatness requires passing through internal chaos. He famously suggested that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Chaos is uncomfortable. It disrupts equilibrium. But without disruption, there is no reorganization at a higher level. Becoming larger than your story. Every person carries a story of limitation. I'm not the type who. I've never been good at. That's just how I am. Risk challenges these narratives. When you act outside your story, you expand it. And gradually, the identity of victim, built on repetition of past events, begins to dissolve. You become someone who acts. Someone who attempts. Someone who dares. That identity cannot coexist with chronic victimhood. Because victimhood requires passivity. Strength requires movement. The inner revolution. The revolution Nietzsche proposed was not political. It was psychological. It demanded that individuals stop kneeling before fear. It demanded that they stop protecting fragility as if it were sacred. It demanded confrontation with one's own comfort addiction. And it promised no applause. Risk does not guarantee success. It guarantees transformation. Each attempt reshapes you slightly. Each confrontation builds tolerance for uncertainty. Each bold step weakens the internal voice that says, "Stay small." Over time, this accumulation of risks produces confidence, not imagined confidence, but earned. Confidence rooted in evidence. Evidence that you survive exposure. That you adapt. That you endure. The edge of growth. There is always an edge. Beyond it lies discomfort. Beyond it lies potential embarrassment. Beyond it lies possibility. The victim lives safely behind the edge. The strong approach it repeatedly. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because they value expansion more than stability. To stop being a victim is not merely to change beliefs. It is to change behavior. To choose challenge over protection. To risk growth instead of preserving wounded identity. And in that repeated choice, something extraordinary happens. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you never fail, but because you no longer avoid trying. There is a feeling more dangerous than fear. More paralyzing than doubt. More corrosive than open hatred. It does not shout. It does not explode. It accumulates. Nietzsche called it ressentiment. Not simple anger. Not momentary irritation. But a slow, internalized bitterness that cannot express itself directly, and therefore turns inward, shaping character. If fear keeps a person from acting, resentment convinces him that action is pointless. And when resentment becomes identity, victimhood becomes permanent. The silent transformation. Resentment rarely begins dramatically. It begins with comparison. Someone else succeeds. Someone else is admired. Someone else dares. If a person feels unable to compete, unable to rise, unable to confront, the emotional energy has to go somewhere. It cannot move upward, so it turns inward. Instead of striving, the person begins judging. Instead of building, he begins criticizing. Instead of expanding, he begins diminishing others in his mind. The strong become arrogant. The successful become corrupt. The ambitious become selfish. Gradually, what began as envy becomes moral superiority. And this is the genius of resentment. It disguises weakness as virtue. The moral inversion. Nietzsche described how resentment creates a reversal of values. When a person lacks power, he redefines power as evil. When he lacks courage, he redefines boldness as recklessness. When he lacks discipline, he redefines ambition as greed. In this inversion, weakness becomes goodness. Strength becomes suspicion. This allows the resentful person to avoid confronting his own limitations. He does not need to grow. He only needs to condemn. Victimhood feeds on this inversion. Because if the world is morally corrupt, then my stagnation becomes proof of purity. I am not rising because I refuse to become like them. This narrative protects the ego. But it poisons the spirit. The psychological mechanism. Resentment thrives in repression. Open anger can be resolved. Open conflict can be confronted. Open rivalry can be engaged. But suppressed hostility festers. When a person feels injured yet powerless to respond, the injury becomes internal narrative. He replays the offense. He revisits the humiliation. He strengthens the identity of being wrong. Over time, resentment becomes a lens. Every success of others confirms injustice. Every failure confirms persecution. The world becomes evidence of unfairness. And the person becomes permanently reactive. This is the full crystallization of victimhood. The cost of bitterness. Resentment drains vitality. It consumes attention. It steals creative energy. It locks the mind in comparison instead of construction. A resentful person may appear morally passionate, but internally he is exhausted. Because bitterness requires maintenance. It must be justified repeatedly. It must be protected from self-reflection. It must be reinforced through narrative. Nietzsche saw resentment as a refusal to confront one's own potential. Instead of asking, "How can I rise?" the resentful mind asks, "How can I prove they are wrong?" This shift is subtle but decisive. One question builds. The other corrodes. The courage to acknowledge envy. The strongest act in dissolving resentment is honesty. To admit envy. To admit wounded pride. To admit insecurity. This feels humiliating at first. But humiliation faced voluntarily becomes strength. Victimhood depends on projection, placing inner weakness onto outer villains. Strength requires ownership, reclaiming emotional energy from accusation. When a person says, "I resent because I feel small," something changes. The enemy is no longer external. The work becomes internal. And internal work leads to expansion. The fourth lesson. Thus the fourth lesson emerges. Do not feed resentment. Transform it. Envy reveals desire. Bitterness reveals blocked ambition. Irritation reveals suppressed will. Instead of condemning the successful, study them. Instead of resenting the powerful, examine your own potential. Instead of rehearsing injustice, build capacity. Resentment is inverted admiration. It signals what you wish you could embody. When interpreted properly, it becomes direction. When ignored, it becomes poison. This shift from reaction to creation. Victimhood reacts. Strength creates. A resentful mind waits for others to fall. A powerful mind seeks to rise. The shift is not immediate. It requires repeated interruption of old narratives. When the thought appears, "They don't deserve it," replace it with, "What can I learn?" When the thought appears, "The system is unfair," replace it with, "How can I adapt?" This does not deny injustice. It refuses to kneel before it. Nietzsche never claimed the world was fair. He claimed that power lies in how one responds to its unfairness. Reclaiming energy. The moment resentment dissolves, energy returns. Mental clarity increases. Motivation sharpens. Attention moves from comparison to construction. This energy was never lost, it was trapped in bitterness. When freed, it fuels growth. And growth reduces resentment further. Because competence replaces insecurity. The more capable you become, the less threatened you feel by others. The less threatened you feel, the less you need moral inversion. The cycle reverses. Victimhood weakens. Strength stabilizes. Beyond bitterness. To transcend resentment is not to become naive. It is to become sovereign. It means no longer allowing other people's success to define your worth. It means no longer allowing past injuries to dictate present direction. It means choosing ambition over accusation. Resentment shrinks the horizon. Ambition expands it. And expansion is the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy. He did not call for kindness as comfort. He called for honesty as liberation. Because only when resentment is exposed can it be transformed. The internal liberation. When resentment fades, something unexpected happens. Peace. Not passive peace. Not resignation. But calm intensity. You no longer feel the need to prove others wrong. You feel the need to prove yourself capable. Your focus shifts from their flaws to your potential. This shift marks the near-complete dismantling of victim identity. Because victimhood requires an external enemy. Strength requires only internal direction. Resentment chains you to the past. Creation anchors you in the future. And in that transition, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Power. There comes a point when responsibility has been accepted. Risk has been embraced. Resentment has been confronted. Yet something remains. A deeper challenge. Because stopping victimhood is not the same as becoming powerful. True strength, in Nietzsche's vision, begins only when a person turns against his own limits, not with hatred, but with transformation. This is the stage of self-overcoming. Beyond repair, toward creation. Many people want to fix themselves. They want to repair wounds, correct weaknesses, eliminate fear, heal trauma. There is nothing wrong with healing. But Nietzsche's vision was more radical. He did not speak of repair. He spoke of creation. You are not a broken object to be restored to a previous version. You are material for something greater. Victimhood tries to return to the moment before the wound. Strength builds something new from it. Self-overcoming begins when a person stops asking, "How do I go back?" and starts asking, "What can I become?" This question changes direction entirely. It shifts focus from recovery to expansion. The enemy within. The final opponent is not society. Not injustice. Not even fear. It is inertia. The tendency to remain what you already are. Human beings cling to identity. Even painful identity feels stable. If you have defined yourself as the one who was wrong, changing that identity can feel like erasing your own history. Self-overcoming demands letting go of familiar versions of yourself. That is frightening. Because it creates internal instability. But without instability, there is no evolution. Nietzsche believed life itself is continuous transformation. To freeze identity is to resist life. The victim wants protection of identity. The strong accept the death of old selves. The discipline of reinvention. Reinvention is not fantasy. It is disciplined action aligned with a higher vision of yourself. You imagine who you could be, not unrealistically, but boldly. More disciplined. More courageous. More articulate. More capable. Then you begin acting in alignment with that version, before you fully feel like it. This is uncomfortable. Because behavior must precede certainty. You speak before you feel confident. You lead before you feel ready. You decide before you feel secure. Each action stretches identity. And gradually, the imagined self becomes real. Victimhood says, I will act when I feel different. Strength says, I will act in order to become different. The weight of freedom. Total responsibility leads to total freedom. But freedom carries weight. When you accept that your future is shaped primarily by your choices, excuses vanish. There is no one left to blame. This can feel overwhelming. But it is also electrifying. Energy that was once tied to resentment, complaint, or fear now fuels deliberate construction. Self-overcoming means choosing direction repeatedly. Not once. Not dramatically. Daily. It means asking, does this action expand me or shrink me? And choosing expansion. The vision of the higher self. Nietzsche spoke metaphorically about the idea of becoming something greater than present humanity, not as domination, but as transcendence of weakness. In psychological terms, this means surpassing your former limits. You do not compete with others. You compete with your yesterday. The higher self is not perfect. It is evolving. It accepts struggle as part of growth. It does not seek comfort as the ultimate value. It seeks intensity. Intensity of thought. Intensity of effort. Intensity of living. Victimhood dulls intensity. Self-overcoming sharpens it. The fifth lesson. The final lesson is clear. Do not aim to be healed. Aim to be transformed. Do not aim to return to who you were. Aim to exceed it. Every limitation contains a direction. Every weakness reveals a training ground. Every failure reveals a frontier. Instead of asking, why am I like this? Ask, how far can I evolve? That question is limitless. And in its pursuit, victimhood dissolves completely. Because a person in evolution has no time for passive identity. He is too busy becoming. Living as process. Strength is not a permanent state. It is process. There will be moments of doubt. Moments of fatigue. Moments when old habits whisper. Self-overcoming means continuing anyway. It means recognizing regression without surrendering to it. It means understanding that growth is uneven, but direction matters more than speed. Victimhood is static. Strength is dynamic. To live dynamically is to constantly reshape yourself in response to challenge. The internal ascent. At the beginning of this journey, the individual blamed the world. Then he accepted responsibility. Then he embraced risk. Then he dissolved resentment. Now he stands alone with himself. No excuses. No bitterness. No safety net of blame. Only potential. This is the summit and the beginning at the same time. Because self-overcoming never ends. Each level reveals a new horizon. Each success reveals new inadequacy. But instead of shrinking from that inadequacy, the strong person welcomes it. It signals room for growth. The final transformation. To stop being a victim is not to become invulnerable. It is to stop defining yourself by wounds. To become strong is not to eliminate struggle. It is to choose growth over stagnation. When a person fully embraces self-overcoming, something shifts permanently. He no longer asks for fairness. He asks for challenge. He no longer seeks protection. He seeks expansion. He no longer builds identity around suffering. He builds identity around transformation. And in that transformation, he finds power. Not power over others. Power over himself. There is a misunderstanding about strength. Many believe strength is intensity. A burst of courage. A dramatic decision. A single breakthrough moment when everything changes. Nietzsche would have rejected this romantic image. Strength is not a moment. It is duration. The individual who abandons victimhood does not become powerful in a single act of defiance. He becomes powerful through sustained will. the capacity to remain aligned with growth long after emotion fades. This is the sixth threshold. The failure of motivation. Motivation is emotional. It surges when pain is fresh, when inspiration strikes, when a powerful idea shakes the mind. But emotion fluctuates. The person who depends on emotional intensity to move forward will inevitably collapse into inertia when that intensity disappears. Victimhood thrives in these collapses. It whispers, "You tried. It didn't work. This is too hard. Maybe this isn't for you." Discipline ignores these whispers. Not because it does not hear them, but because it values direction over feeling. Nietzsche admired individuals who could endure themselves, who could persist beyond mood. The ability to remain committed to growth when enthusiasm vanishes is the beginning of real power. The long will. Most people possess short will. They act briefly. They attempt briefly. They endure briefly. Then they retreat. Long will is different. Long will is the decision to stay on the path long enough for transformation to occur. It understands that change is not immediate. Muscle builds through repetition. Skill builds through repetition. Confidence builds through repetition. Character builds through repetition. The victim seeks rapid relief. The strong accept gradual construction. This difference separates stagnation from mastery. Enduring boredom. One of the most overlooked obstacles to strength is boredom. Growth is rarely dramatic. It is repetitive. Training the body. Training the mind. Building competence. These processes lack glamour. And without glamour, many abandon them. Victimhood seeks emotional stimulation. Strength tolerates monotony. The person who can endure boredom without collapsing into distraction acquires an extraordinary advantage. Because consistency outperforms intensity. Nietzsche's philosophy demands this consistency. It demands remaining loyal to your own evolution even when it feels slow. The discipline of self-command. Self-overcoming requires self-command. Self-command means you do what aligns with growth even when you do not feel like doing it. It means separating impulse from decision. Impulse says, rest. Avoid. Escape. Decision says, continue. Victimhood listens to impulse. Strength obeys decision. This is not about suppressing emotion entirely. It is about refusing to let emotion dictate destiny. When you act according to principle rather than mood, you become internally stable. And stability allows expansion. Resistance to regression. There will be moments of regression. Old habits return. Old narratives reappear. You are not capable. This is pointless. You always fail. These internal voices do not disappear permanently. They weaken through confrontation. Discipline means recognizing regression without dramatizing it. Instead of saying, "I've fallen back, I'm hopeless," the disciplined individual says, "I have slipped. Now I correct." Victimhood interprets regression as proof of limitation. Strength interprets regression as part of process. The difference is interpretation and repetition of effort. The architecture of habit. Identity is built through habit. If you consistently act courageously, you become courageous. If you consistently avoid risk, you become avoidant. Habits accumulate silently. The victim mindset is maintained through habitual thought patterns, blame, comparison, hesitation. Strength is maintained through habitual behaviors, effort, reflection, adjustment. The more disciplined the pattern, the stronger the identity. Nietzsche's philosophy emphasizes construction of self through action. You are not fixed. You are shaped through repeated decisions. Every day reinforces a direction. You either reinforce passivity or reinforce power. The sixth lesson. Thus the sixth lesson emerges. Commit to long-term discipline. Do not rely on inspiration. Do not wait for certainty. Do not depend on emotion. Build structure. Set standards. Honor them consistently. Strength is not visible immediately. It accumulates beneath the surface. The person who endures quietly, who trains daily, who refines behavior repeatedly, eventually reaches a level where others see sudden transformation. But it was never sudden. It was sustained. Solitude and focus. Discipline often requires solitude. Not physical isolation necessarily, but independence from constant validation. If your growth depends on applause, it will weaken when applause disappears. Victimhood seeks recognition of pain. Strength seeks respect earned through consistency. There will be times when progress is invisible. When no one notices effort. Those moments test resolve. Do you continue when unseen? The disciplined individual does. Because he understands that true transformation is internal before it is external. The stability of power. Power built on emotion collapses. Power built on discipline stabilizes. The individual who develops long will becomes less reactive, less shaken by criticism, less distracted by praise. He becomes centered. Centered individuals are difficult to manipulate. They do not swing between extremes. They move steadily. And steady movement surpasses sporadic brilliance. From struggle to structure. At the beginning of this journey, struggle was chaotic. Fear, blame, resentment. Now struggle becomes structured. You confront weakness deliberately. You train consistently. You refine repeatedly. The chaos becomes system. And system creates reliability. Reliability creates confidence. Confidence reinforces discipline. A new identity solidifies, not fragile, not dependent, but constructed. The quiet transformation. Strength rarely announces itself. It grows quietly. One repeated effort. One resisted impulse. One disciplined day. Then another. Then another. Over time, the individual who once felt powerless notices something subtle. He does not panic as easily. He does not blame as quickly. He does not retreat as often. He has changed. Not through drama. Through discipline. To stop being a victim is an awakening. To become strong is a construction. And construction requires time. There is a stage beyond discipline. A stage where structure alone is not enough. A person may have accepted responsibility. He may have embraced risk. He may have dissolved resentment. He may have built discipline. And yet something unsettles him. Because growth does not end in stability. It moves toward transformation. And transformation requires chaos. The fear of inner disorder. Most people are afraid of internal chaos. They fear contradiction. They fear doubt. They fear intense emotion. They fear instability. So they cling to order. They build routines. They construct certainty. They reduce complexity. Order feels safe. But excessive order becomes limitation. Nietzsche understood something profound. Before higher organization, there must be disruption. He once suggested that one must carry chaos within to give birth to something luminous. Chaos is not destruction. It is reconfiguration. It is the moment when old structures weaken so new ones can form. Victimhood resists chaos. Strength endures it. The breaking of identity. Self-overcoming does not happen gently. It often feels like disintegration. Beliefs collapse. Certainties dissolve. Old motivations lose power. The individual who once relied on clear explanations now confronts ambiguity. This is dangerous territory. Because in chaos, identity feels unstable. The victim sees chaos as proof of failure. The strong see chaos as transition. If old narratives are dissolving, something larger is trying to emerge. But emergence is uncomfortable. It feels like losing ground before gaining height. Confronting internal conflict. Within every growing person, there are contradictions. Ambition versus fear. Discipline versus impulse. Confidence versus insecurity. Victimhood tries to silence contradiction by retreating. Strength studies contradiction. Instead of saying, "I shouldn't feel this," the strong ask, "What does this reveal?" Internal conflict is not weakness. It is friction. And friction generates force. Without tension, nothing sharpens. The disciplined individual who allows himself to feel conflict without collapsing into it gains depth. He becomes psychologically complex, and complexity increases capability. The collapse before expansion. There are moments in development when progress feels reversed. Effort increases. Results seem delayed. Confusion intensifies. This is often the threshold of transformation. Before a new level of strength stabilizes, the old level destabilizes. The ego resists change. Old habits fight for survival. The person may question everything. Was I wrong? Is this worth it? Should I return to what was familiar? Victimhood retreats here. Strength persists. Not blindly, but consciously. Understanding that instability can precede growth. The seventh lesson. Thus the seventh lesson becomes clear. Do not fear internal chaos. Use it. When confusion appears, examine it. When contradiction arises, explore it. When discomfort intensifies, observe it. Do not rush to escape. Chaos reorganized becomes higher order. Pain integrated becomes insight. Instability endured becomes maturity. The individual who can withstand internal turbulence without abandoning direction gains resilience that cannot be easily shaken. Beyond emotional fragility. Victimhood is emotionally fragile. It depends on stable comfort. It avoids uncertainty. It panics under disruption. Strength builds emotional tolerance. Not numbness, tolerance. The ability to experience strong emotion without immediate reaction. The ability to remain steady when identity feels stretched. The ability to endure uncertainty without seeking immediate relief. These capacities are forged in chaos. They cannot be developed in constant calm. The transformation of suffering. Earlier, suffering was interpreted as injustice. Then it became material for growth. Now, suffering becomes refinement. It sharpens perception. It deepens awareness. It clarifies values. Chaos forces reevaluation. What truly matters? What is superficial? What can be discarded? Through this process, identity becomes lighter and stronger simultaneously. Old attachments dissolve. New priorities solidify. The person becomes less reactive and more deliberate. Standing in the storm. There is a moment when the individual feels surrounded by uncertainty. Nothing feels fixed. Old structures are gone. New ones are not yet stable. This is the storm. Victimhood seeks immediate shelter. Strength stands still. Not recklessly, but patiently. The storm will pass. And when it does, the person who remained conscious within it emerges transformed. He has proven something to himself. He does not collapse under instability. That knowledge is power. The integration of chaos. Eventually, chaos integrates. New beliefs form. New habits stabilize. New confidence appears. But it is different from earlier confidence. It is not naive. It is earned through disruption. The individual now knows that disorder does not equal destruction. He has survived internal breakdown without losing direction. He trusts his capacity to adapt. This trust marks a new level of strength. The expansion of self. Each cycle of chaos and reorganization increases capacity. The individual becomes more tolerant of complexity, less dependent on certainty, more capable of handling challenge. Victimhood shrinks under pressure. Strength expands under pressure. This difference defines destiny. Because life will inevitably introduce disruption. The question is not whether chaos will arrive. The question is how you respond when it does. From fragility to resilience. Resilience is not absence of struggle. It is the ability to move through struggle without losing orientation. The disciplined individual who embraces chaos develops inner elasticity. He bends without breaking. He adjusts without surrendering. He adapts without abandoning ambition. And this elasticity allows continued evolution. To stop being a victim, one must endure responsibility, risk, and discipline. To become powerful, one must also endure chaos. Because higher order demands temporary disorder, there is a final chain that binds the individual long after he has confronted fear, dissolved resentment, embraced discipline, and endured chaos. It is invisible. It is subtle. And it is powerful. It is the chain of borrowed values. A person may believe he is strong. He may act decisively. He may take responsibility. But if his values are inherited without examination, his strength remains partial. Victimhood is not sustained only by weakness. It is sustained by conformity. The comfort of ready-made beliefs. From childhood, values are handed to us. What is good? What is bad? What is success? What is failure? What is respectable? What is shameful? These beliefs shape perception before independent thought fully develops. Most people never question them deeply. They assume that moral frameworks given to them are universal truths. But Nietzsche challenged this assumption radically. He believed many values were constructed not from strength, but from fear. Not from abundance, but from insecurity. If a value system rewards submission, discourages ambition, glorifies suffering, and mistrusts excellence, it may serve stability, but it does not serve growth. The hidden obedience. Victimhood often hides inside obedience. When a person measures himself solely by external standards, he becomes dependent on approval. If society praises him, he feels worthy. If society criticizes him, he feels diminished. His internal compass is outsourced. This creates fragility. Because approval fluctuates. Strength requires an internal standard. A code not imposed, but chosen. But choosing values demands courage. Because once chosen, they cannot be blamed on others. The courage to reevaluate. To construct personal values, one must first dismantle inherited ones. This process is uncomfortable. It may create tension with family, with culture, with peers. When you stop accepting definitions blindly, you risk isolation. Victimhood fears isolation. Strength tolerates it. Reevaluation begins with questions. Do I believe this because it is true, or because it is familiar? Do I condemn ambition because it is harmful, or because it intimidates me? Do I praise humility because it is virtuous, or because it protects me from competition? Such questions destabilize certainty. But without destabilization, independence is impossible. From reaction to creation. A person who rejects inherited values without replacing them becomes lost. Rebellion alone does not create strength. It creates noise. True independence requires construction. What do you stand for? What do you respect? What qualities do you admire? What standards will you hold yourself to? These answers must not be reactive. They must be deliberate. If resentment shapes your values, they will remain inverted. If clarity shapes your values, they will become stabilizing. The eighth lesson. Thus the eighth lesson emerges. Do not live by borrowed standards. Create your own code. This does not mean rejecting everything inherited. It means testing everything. Adopt what strengthens you. Discard what diminishes you. Refine what limits you. Your values should expand your potential, not shrink it. They should demand growth, not excuse weakness. They should elevate discipline, not justify stagnation. The weight of self-defined morality. When you define your own values, you lose excuses. If honesty is your chosen value, you must practice it even when it is inconvenient. If discipline is your chosen value, you must honor it even when unseen. If excellence is your chosen value, you must pursue it without external validation. This is heavy. Because no one else carries it for you. Victimhood hides behind collective morality. Strength stands on personal conviction. The independence of judgment. When personal values solidify, external criticism loses destructive power. You may still listen. You may still learn. But you are not shaken by disagreement. Because your actions align with your code. The person who depends on social validation constantly recalibrates himself. The independent individual remains steady. Not arrogant, but anchored. Anchoring reduces anxiety. Because direction is internal. The risk of isolation. Creating personal values may distance you from those who prefer conformity. You may be misunderstood. You may be labeled. You may be criticized. This is the price of independence. Victimhood seeks belonging at any cost. Strength accepts selective belonging. It understands that universal approval is incompatible with authentic growth. The fear of rejection once paralyzed you. Now it refines you. You choose alignment over acceptance. Integrity as power. When thought, word, and action align with chosen values, integrity forms. Integrity generates confidence. Not surface confidence, structural confidence. You no longer pretend. You no longer adapt yourself excessively for approval. You operate consistently. Consistency builds trust, both internally and externally. You trust yourself because you know your code. Others sense stability. This stability differentiates constructed strength from reactive behavior. Beyond external definitions. Success defined externally may conflict with your chosen path. Society may define success as wealth. You may define it as mastery. Society may define status as visibility. You may define it as capability. Society may define morality as compliance. You may define it as courage. Without internal clarity, you will oscillate. With internal clarity, you will move steadily. Victimhood oscillates. Strength stabilizes. The integration of identity. When personal values integrate fully, identity stabilizes at a higher level. You are no longer reacting to injustice. You are no longer defined by wounds. You are no longer driven by resentment. You are guided by principles. Principles reduce chaos. They channel ambition. They refine effort. And they protect against regression. The quiet authority. True authority does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It radiates through coherence. The individual who lives by self-created values does not need to convince others of his strength. His consistency speaks. His discipline speaks. His resilience speaks. Victimhood seeks acknowledgement. Strength embodies presence. The transition to mastery. At this stage, something profound has occurred. The individual has moved from reaction to authorship. He does not merely respond to life. He shapes it through chosen standards. He does not seek permission to grow. He defines growth on his terms. And in doing so, he becomes internally sovereign. To stop being a victim requires responsibility, risk, discipline, chaos, and resilience. To become powerful requires independence of values. Because without self-defined standards, strength remains incomplete. There comes a stage in development that few anticipate. After responsibility. After risk. After discipline. After chaos. After the creation of personal values. There remains something unavoidable. Solitude. Not simple physical aloneness, but psychological separation. Because growth changes alignment. And alignment determines proximity. The distance that growth creates. When a person begins abandoning victimhood, subtle shifts occur. He complains less. He blames less. He reacts less. At first, this feels empowering. But gradually, he notices something else. Conversations feel different. The complaints that once felt familiar now feel repetitive. The resentment that once felt shared now feels draining. The safety of group agreement now feels limiting. Growth creates distance. Not intentionally. Inevitably. Victimhood bonds through shared grievance. Strength separates through personal direction. This separation can feel isolating. And isolation tests resolve. The need for belonging. Human beings are social. Belonging feels essential. Approval feels stabilizing. Shared emotion feels comforting. When a person leaves the emotional patterns of victimhood, he may temporarily lose belonging. The group that bonds over injustice may see his independence as arrogance. The group that bonds over comfort may see his ambition as threat. The group that bonds over conformity may see his values as rebellion. This is the trial. Will you shrink to re-enter familiarity? Or will you tolerate distance to preserve growth? The loneliness of responsibility. Responsibility is empowering, but isolating. When you stop blaming others, you remove shared enemies. Without shared enemies, many social bonds weaken. Victimhood builds community around opposition. Strength builds character around direction. Direction is often individual. The disciplined individual may wake early while others sleep. He may train while others rest. He may build while others complain. These differences accumulate. And difference creates space. That space is solitude. The ninth lesson. Thus the ninth lesson emerges. Learn to endure solitude without collapsing into self-doubt. Solitude does not mean rejection. It means transition. You are no longer aligned with former patterns. And new alignment takes time. Victimhood fears being alone. Strength uses aloneness as refinement. In solitude, noise decreases. Clarity increases. The difference between isolation and independence. Isolation is painful when it is interpreted as exclusion. Independence is powerful when solitude is chosen. The difference lies in interpretation. If you say, "No one understands me," you feel abandoned. If you say, "I am walking a path not everyone chooses," you feel intentional. The same condition, different meaning. Meaning determines emotional stability. The strong do not require constant validation. They prefer alignment over popularity. The silence that reveals. In solitude, distraction fades. There is no constant feedback. No applause. No reassurance. You confront yourself. Your discipline without witnesses. Your values without agreement. Your direction without approval. This is uncomfortable. Because without external reinforcement, motivation must become internal. Victimhood depends on audience. Strength depends on conviction. The danger of regression. Solitude can tempt regression. The mind whispers, "It was easier before. You were more accepted. You belong." And belonging is powerful. The desire to return may arise. But return means shrinking. Return means re-entering familiar patterns of blame or safety. To endure solitude is to trust future alignment. Growth does not eliminate connection. It refines it. The individual eventually finds others aligned with discipline, resilience, independence. But this often happens after transition. The internal dialogue. In solitude, internal dialogue intensifies. Without external distraction, unresolved doubts surface. Am I doing this correctly? Is this worth it? Will this lead somewhere? These doubts are natural. Victimhood seeks immediate reassurance. Strength tolerates uncertainty. It says, continue. Solitude strengthens self-trust. Because when you persist without validation, you prove loyalty to your own path. And loyalty to direction builds unshakable confidence. The refinement of relationships. As identity evolves, relationships evolve. Some fade. Some deepen. Some disappear entirely. This is not cruelty. It is alignment. The disciplined individual no longer bonds over complaint. He bonds over growth. He no longer seeks sympathy. He seeks strength. Quality replaces quantity. Victimhood measures connection by emotional agreement. Strength measures connection by shared standards. The power of standing alone. There is extraordinary power in standing alone without bitterness. To disagree without anger. To separate without resentment. To choose differently without needing to condemn others. This calm independence radiates. It signals internal security. A person who can stand alone is difficult to manipulate. He does not fear exclusion. He does not chase validation. He does not compromise values for applause. That is authority. From solitude to sovereignty. Solitude, endured correctly, transforms into sovereignty. You become self-directed, self-regulated, self-sustaining. Not emotionally isolated, but internally anchored. When others approve, you remain steady. When others criticize, you remain steady. When others misunderstand, you remain steady. Stability replaces fragility. And stability is strength. The transition complete. At the beginning of this journey, you were defined by what happened to you. Then you defined yourself by what you chose. Now you stand independently of both. You are not your wounds. You are not your critics. You are not your audience. You are your direction. And direction, chosen deliberately, becomes identity. Victimhood dissolves entirely when identity is self-anchored. Because there is no external structure left to lean on. Only personal will. Solitude is not punishment. It is initiation. Those who endure it emerge sharper, clearer, more deliberate, and profoundly strong. There is a final shift that separates constructed strength from mere survival. Up to this point, the individual has fought internally. He has dismantled victimhood. He has embraced responsibility. He has endured risk. He has dissolved resentment. He has built discipline. He has survived chaos. He has created personal values. He has endured solitude. But strength that exists only for self-preservation remains incomplete. True power expands beyond self. The limits of self-protection. At the beginning of transformation, the focus was defensive. Escape weakness. Overcome fear. Break dependency. This stage is necessary. But if growth remains centered only on avoiding regression, it stagnates. A person who lives only to avoid becoming a victim still orbits victimhood. He is defined by what he escaped. Strength reaches its next stage when it asks a different question. What will I build? Not for validation. Not for revenge. Not to prove others wrong. But because creation expresses power. The shift from survival to contribution. Victimhood focuses on damage. Strength focuses on construction. Survival is reactive. Creation is proactive. When a person begins to channel his discipline into something larger than himself, identity stabilizes further. He no longer grows merely to protect himself. He grows to produce. To create work. To create influence. To create value. To create change. This shift dissolves self-absorption. It directs energy outward constructively rather than defensively. The will to create. Nietzsche's philosophy centered around expansion of life force. Creation is its highest expression. Not necessarily art. Not necessarily fame. Creation can be mastery in a craft. Leadership in a field. Excellence in a discipline. Raising strong individuals. Building systems. Solving problems. Creation is structured energy. It transforms potential into reality. The victim consumes energy. The strong generate it. When you create, you affirm your power. You no longer merely respond to life. You shape it. The 10th lesson. Thus the 10th lesson emerges. Do not stop at strength for yourself. Create something that outlives you. Purpose organizes effort. Without purpose, discipline eventually weakens. With purpose, effort gains direction. Purpose reduces internal conflict. It aligns actions with long-term vision. It gives suffering context. It gives discipline meaning. It gives solitude significance. The expansion of responsibility. When you begin creating beyond yourself, responsibility deepens. You are no longer responsible only for your growth. You are responsible for the quality of what you produce. This increases pressure. But it also increases focus. When your work matters, distractions lose power. When your creation has weight, comfort becomes secondary. Victimhood avoids responsibility. Strength expands it. The more responsibility you voluntarily carry, the more capable you become. The stabilization of identity. At this stage, identity is no longer fragile. It is no longer reactive. It is anchored in direction and contribution. Criticism does not shatter it. Praise does not inflate it. Failure does not erase it. Because the individual sees himself as a builder. Builders understand iteration. They understand refinement. They understand process. Victims interpret failure as confirmation of limitation. Creators interpret failure as adjustment. The integration of all lessons. Look backward. Responsibility replaced blame. Risk replaced hesitation. Discipline replaced inconsistency. Chaos replaced rigidity. Personal values replaced conformity. Solitude replaced dependency. Now creation replaces self-defense. Each stage reinforced the next. Strength is cumulative. It is constructed layer by layer. Remove any layer, and the structure weakens. Integrate all layers, and the structure stabilizes. The absence of resentment. When purpose is clear, resentment loses relevance. You no longer monitor others' success. You no longer compare constantly. You no longer seek justification. You are too focused on building. Creation absorbs energy that once fueled bitterness. Ambition replaces envy. Clarity replaces complaint. Direction replaces reaction. This is liberation. Living without the victim narrative. At the beginning of this journey, identity was defined by injury. Now identity is defined by contribution. The past no longer dictates posture. It informs resilience, but does not limit vision. You are not the sum of what happened to you. You are the sum of what you deliberately construct. That understanding changes posture, voice, presence, decision-making. The quiet authority of purpose. A person with purpose does not need to announce strength. It becomes visible through consistency. He wakes with direction. He works with focus. He adjusts without panic. He endures difficulty without dramatizing it. He does not complain about obstacles. He calculates them. Victimhood personalizes obstacles. Strength strategizes around them. Beyond ego. There is one final danger at this stage: ego inflation. When strength stabilizes, it may tempt arrogance. But true power does not need comparison. It does not need domination. It does not need validation. It needs continuation. The moment growth becomes performance, it weakens. The moment purpose becomes status-seeking, direction blurs. To remain strong, creation must remain authentic. Not theatrical. Not reactive. Aligned with chosen values. The final transition. The journey from victimhood to strength is not a single leap. It is a sequence. Each chapter of transformation removes one layer of dependence. Blame falls away. Fear weakens. Resentment dissolves. Discipline stabilizes. Chaos refines. Values anchor. Solitude strengthens. Purpose expands. And at the end of this arc, something remarkable happens. You no longer think about victimhood. It becomes irrelevant. Because your identity is built on construction, not reaction. On direction, not damage. On will, not wounds. The state of strength. Strength is not loud. It is stable. It does not require constant proof. It requires continuous alignment. It does not ask for fairness. It asks for opportunity to build. It does not seek protection. It seeks expansion. And once you reach this state, you understand something deeply. Victimhood was never destiny. It was interpretation. and interpretation can always be changed. There is one dimension that exposes weakness faster than anything else: time. You can speak boldly for a day. You can act courageously for a week. You can maintain discipline for a month. But time reveals structure. Time exposes whether strength is performance or architecture. By the time an individual reaches this stage of development, he no longer battles obvious victimhood. He no longer blames reflexively. He no longer fears risk in the same way. He no longer feeds resentment. He has endured solitude. He has built discipline. He has begun creating. Yet one question remains: will this endure? The difference between intensity and permanence. Many people confuse transformation with intensity. They experience a powerful realization. They change behavior temporarily. They feel reborn. Then time tests them. Daily monotony returns. Obstacles multiply. Excitement fades. If strength depends on emotional intensity, it dissolves. If strength is structural, it persists. Victimhood collapses under time because it is reactive. Strength survives time because it is constructed deliberately. The individual must now shift from episodic effort to architectural living. Life as construction. At this level, life is no longer a sequence of reactions. It becomes design. What am I building over years? What habits accumulate? What skills compound? What relationships align with direction? The weak drift through time. The strong shape it. Time is neutral. It amplifies whatever pattern dominates. If complaint dominates, time amplifies bitterness. If discipline dominates, time amplifies capability. If purpose dominates, time amplifies impact. The 11th lesson emerges quietly but decisively. Think in decades, not days. The temptation of immediate gratification. Even after transformation, the pull of immediacy remains. Quick validation. Short-term comfort. Instant reward. Victimhood thrives on immediacy. It seeks relief now. Strength tolerates delay. Delayed gratification is not suppression of pleasure. It is prioritization of growth. The disciplined individual understands compounding. Small daily improvements, repeated consistently, create dramatic long-term difference. But compounding requires patience. And patience requires vision. Without vision, discipline weakens. The long horizon. When a person extends his time horizon, his decisions change. He becomes less reactive. He chooses habits that align with long-term identity. He avoids distractions that fracture direction. He accepts short-term discomfort for long-term strength. The victim asks, "How do I feel today?" The strong ask, "Who am I becoming over years?" This shift stabilizes behavior. Impulses lose authority. Because temporary emotion no longer dictates permanent direction. The weight of legacy. There comes a moment when the individual begins thinking beyond his own lifespan. What remains after me? Not necessarily monuments. Not necessarily fame. But influence. Work. Ideas. Standards. People shaped by example. Legacy does not require scale. It requires integrity. When you live consistently by chosen values, your presence alters others subtly. Discipline inspires. Resilience strengthens. Integrity stabilizes environments. Legacy is the echo of structured living. The 11th lesson. Thus the 11th lesson becomes clear. Live in a way that time strengthens you instead of exposing you. Structure habits so that they compound. Choose values that remain durable. Build skills that expand opportunity. Invest effort where return grows. Victimhood erodes under time. Strength compounds under time. The difference is orientation. Patience as power. Patience is often mistaken for passivity. In reality, disciplined patience is strategic aggression against stagnation. It means continuing when results are not yet visible. It means trusting process over immediate feedback. It means refusing to abandon direction because applause is absent. Time rewards consistency. The impatient abandon projects prematurely. The patient dominates silently. Stability under criticism. As impact grows, criticism grows. When you build, you become visible. Visibility attracts evaluation. If identity remains fragile, criticism destabilizes. But when identity is anchored in long-term construction, criticism becomes data, not threat. Victimhood seeks protection from judgment. Strength tolerates scrutiny. Because long-term builders understand iteration. They adjust without collapsing. They refine without abandoning direction. The integration of past and future. At this stage, the past no longer controls the present. It informs resilience. Wounds once used as justification for stagnation now serve as evidence of survival. The future no longer intimidates. It motivates design. The present becomes strategic. Every day is a brick. Every action is alignment or misalignment. This awareness increases seriousness, but not heaviness. It creates calm intensity. The quiet confidence of structure. There is a different type of confidence at this level. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It comes from knowing that your habits support your goals. That your direction aligns with your values. That your effort compounds rather than dissipates. This confidence does not depend on mood. It depends on architecture. And architecture survives fluctuation. The end of victim time. Victimhood wastes time. It replays the past. It waits for apology. It waits for fairness. It waits for rescue. Strength uses time. It builds during unfairness. It progresses without apology. It acts without permission. The victim measures life by what was lost. The strong measure life by what is constructed. Living deliberately. Deliberate living requires awareness of trade-offs. Every yes eliminates a no. Every commitment reduces alternative paths. But clarity reduces regret. When direction is chosen consciously, sacrifice feels purposeful. Victimhood resents sacrifice. Strength embraces it. Because sacrifice is investment. And investment creates leverage. The final consolidation. At this stage, the journey from victimhood to strength is complete in structure. Blame is gone. Fear is integrated. Resentment is dissolved. Discipline is consistent. Values are internalized. Solitude is tolerated. Purpose is active. Time is structured. What remains is maintenance and expansion. Strength is no longer fragile. It is reinforced daily. The architecture stands. When time strengthens rather than weakens you, something profound has happened. You are no longer at the mercy of circumstance. You are no longer shaped primarily by reaction. You are architect. Life becomes construction rather than survival. And this construction continues. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. But steadily. Brick by brick. Year by year. Choice by choice. Victimhood is reactive time. Strength is deliberate time. And the individual who understands this no longer fears the future. He designs it. There is one reality that no discipline, no will, no strength can eliminate. Death. Every human life moves toward it. Some ignore it. Some fear it. Some avoid thinking about it entirely. But Nietzsche believed that awareness of mortality is not something to escape. It is something to confront. Because how you relate to death determines how you live. And how you live determines whether you remain a victim of circumstance, or become sovereign over your time. The fear that shrinks life. Many forms of victimhood are rooted in fear of loss. Fear of losing security. Fear of losing approval. Fear of losing comfort. Fear of losing identity. Behind all these fears stands a deeper one, fear of impermanence. If life is fragile and temporary, the mind seeks protection. It clings to safety. It avoids risk. It chooses familiarity over expansion. But protection has a cost. When safety becomes the highest value, life contracts. You avoid speaking honestly. You avoid taking bold action. You avoid attempting greatness. You survive, but you do not fully live. Victimhood hides inside preservation. Strength accepts impermanence. The liberation of finite time. When a person truly understands that time is limited, clarity sharpens. Petty resentment feels wasteful. Endless comparison feels absurd. Excuses feel fragile. Mortality cuts through illusion. It asks, if this life is temporary, what is worth building? If this moment will not return, what is worth attempting? If regret is inevitable, which regret can I live with? The awareness of death is not morbid. It is focusing. It removes trivial conflict. It magnifies meaningful effort. The 12th lesson. Thus the 12th lesson emerges. Live in a way that you would accept repeating. Imagine that your life, exactly as it is, would recur endlessly. Would you be willing to relive it? Not just the highlights. Every decision. Every avoidance. Every compromise. every act of courage. If not, what must change? This thought experiment transforms daily behavior. Because it forces ownership of every action. Victimhood postpones living. Strength intensifies it. Fearless engagement. To accept mortality is to stop negotiating with comfort. You realize that postponing ambition is dangerous. That delaying difficult conversations is costly. That hiding potential is tragic. Fearless engagement does not mean recklessness. It means alignment. You speak what matters. You pursue what expands you. You build what outlasts you. You forgive faster. You resent less. You act more deliberately. Because time is not guaranteed. The dissolution of triviality. Mortality strips triviality of its power. Petty offense loses significance. Minor criticism loses weight. Social approval becomes secondary. What matters becomes sharper. Integrity. Impact. Mastery. Contribution. Presence. Victimhood obsesses over small injustices. Strength evaluates significance. If something will not matter in 10 years, it does not dominate today. This creates psychological freedom. Urgency without panic. There is a difference between urgency and anxiety. Anxiety fears the future. Urgency values the present. When you accept mortality calmly, urgency arises naturally. You no longer waste years waiting for perfect conditions. You begin. You refine. You iterate. But you do not rush blindly. You move steadily with intention. This balanced urgency is powerful. It prevents stagnation without creating chaos. Living without regret. Regret grows from inaction, not from failure. Failure teaches. Inaction lingers. The strongest individuals often have scars of effort, but fewer scars of avoidance. They attempted. They spoke. They risked. Even if imperfectly. Victimhood collects regret. Strength collects experience. Mortality makes this difference visible. When life is finite, experience outweighs safety. The alignment of life and values. Awareness of death demands alignment. You cannot afford to live against your own code. Every misaligned action becomes heavier. Every compromise feels sharper. When you know time is limited, authenticity increases. You speak more directly. You choose more carefully. You invest more consciously. Because each choice consumes irreplaceable time. Victimhood drifts through time unconsciously. Strength navigates it deliberately. The calm acceptance. Confronting mortality does not require despair. It requires acceptance. Life is temporary. That is not tragedy. It is boundary. Boundaries give shape. Without an ending, meaning dissolves. Because time is limited, effort gains intensity. Because time is limited, growth becomes urgent. Because time is limited, strength matters. Beyond fear of death. Ironically, those who avoid thinking about death often live more fearfully. They protect comfort obsessively. They avoid risk. They delay dreams. They shrink potential. Those who confront mortality often live more boldly. Not recklessly, but honestly. They understand that death is unavoidable, but regret is optional. This awareness dismantles the final layer of victimhood. Because victimhood is often hidden fear of loss. Strength accepts loss as part of existence. The completion of transformation. Now the arc is complete. Blame is gone. Fear is integrated. Resentment dissolved. Discipline stabilized. Chaos endured. Values created. Solitude mastered. Purpose active. Time structured. Mortality accepted. What remains? Living. Not defensively. Not reactively. But intentionally. The final state. To stop being a victim is to reclaim authorship. To become strong is to live as if each choice shapes identity permanently. When mortality is acknowledged, hesitation weakens. Excuses collapse. Procrastination loses power. You act not because you are fearless. You act because time is finite. And that is enough. Victimhood wastes time fearing unfairness. Strength uses time building meaning. And the individual who understands this walks differently. He speaks differently. He decides differently. He lives differently. Because he no longer waits. He builds. He acts. He becomes. There is a final evolution beyond personal strength. At first, the individual fights to escape victimhood. Then he builds discipline. Then he constructs values. Then he endures solitude. Then he structures time. Then he confronts mortality. But eventually, strength stops being internal struggle. It becomes presence. And presence influences. From self-transformation to impact. In earlier stages, energy was directed inward. Correct habits. Confront fear. Rebuild identity. Refine discipline. Now energy radiates outward. Without intention to dominate. Without hunger for recognition. Simply through coherence. When thought, action, and values align over time, a person becomes stable. Stability generates gravity. Others sense it. Not because of loudness, but because of consistency. The invisible influence. Victimhood spreads through emotion. Complaint attracts complaint. Resentment attracts resentment. Helplessness invites helplessness. Strength spreads differently. Through example. Through tone. Through reaction. When faced with difficulty, the strong remain composed. When faced with criticism, they evaluate calmly. When faced with uncertainty, they move deliberately. This behavior becomes reference. Others begin to recalibrate unconsciously. Not because they were told to, but because strength exposes fragility. The 13th lesson. Thus the 13th lesson emerges. Do not merely escape weakness. Become a standard. A standard is not imposed. It is embodied. It does not preach. It demonstrates. The individual who lives consistently according to self-created values becomes an unspoken reference point. In chaos, he stabilizes. In conflict, he clarifies. In hesitation, he advances. This changes environments. The difference between noise and power. Many attempt to project strength loudly. They exaggerate confidence. They display dominance. They seek visibility. But noise is not power. True power requires no announcement. It becomes visible through reliability. The person who does what he says, who follows through, who maintains discipline privately, who acts in alignment even when unseen. Such a person alters expectations. Standards rise around him. Responsibility expands again. Influence increases responsibility. If others look to you, consciously or not, your integrity matters more. Inconsistency now affects more than yourself. Victimhood blames influence for pressure. Strength accepts influence as duty. The individual who becomes a force understands. My behavior sets tone. My discipline sets rhythm. My reactions shape atmosphere. This awareness deepens seriousness. But not rigidity. Because influence requires flexibility as well as firmness. The calm in conflict. Environments inevitably experience tension. Arguments arise. Stress accumulates. Uncertainty spreads. The individual who has conquered internal chaos responds differently. He does not amplify conflict. He absorbs it. He reframes it. He reduces emotional volatility. Victimhood reacts. Strength regulates. And regulation stabilizes others. This is power beyond dominance. It is power through composure. The absence of victim energy. At this stage, victim language disappears entirely. No more. It's unfair. No more. They always. No more. I can't because. Language shifts. What is possible? What is necessary? What is next? This linguistic shift affects thinking. Thinking affects behavior. Behavior affects environment. Strength becomes contagious. Not emotionally explosive, but structurally consistent. The authority of alignment. Authority does not come from title. It comes from alignment. When words match actions over years, credibility forms. Credibility generates trust. Trust amplifies influence. The person no longer needs to argue for respect. Respect accumulates naturally. Victimhood demands validation. Strength earns recognition indirectly. The reshaping of culture. When enough individuals operate from strength rather than victimhood, culture shifts. Complaints decrease. Responsibility increases. Ambition normalizes. Resilience becomes expected. This transformation begins internally, but scales outward. Nietzsche did not envision passive adaptation. He envisioned individuals who redefine standards. Not through force. Through embodiment. The risk of corruption. There is danger here. Power can inflate ego. Influence can distort humility. If self-awareness weakens, strength can convert into arrogance. To prevent this, one must remember the foundation. Responsibility first. Discipline always. Self-reflection continuously. Influence must remain service to values, not domination of others. Otherwise, the structure fractures. The completion of becoming. At this stage, the transformation is no longer about escaping pain. It is about shaping reality. The individual who once reacted to circumstances now designs them. He chooses environments carefully. He contributes intentionally. He withdraws strategically. He speaks deliberately. His presence carries weight. Not because he demands it, but because he earned it. The force of character. Character is accumulated choice. Repeated alignment. Repeated correction. Repeated courage. Victimhood fractures character. Strength consolidates it. When character solidifies, identity becomes resilient. No single event destabilizes it. No single criticism collapses it. No temporary failure defines it. Because identity is no longer fragile. It is constructed. Living as example. The final transition from victim to strength is not announced. It is noticed. Others sense difference. They observe calm where there was once reaction. Clarity where there was once confusion. Direction where there was once hesitation. And gradually, without speeches, without declarations, a quiet transformation spreads. To stop being a victim is personal liberation. To become strong is personal construction. To become a force is environmental transformation. And the person who reaches this stage understands something fundamental. Strength is not about overpowering others. It is about embodying standards so clearly that weakness has no appeal. There is a subtle danger at the height of development. A person who has dismantled victimhood, who has embraced responsibility, who has endured solitude, who has built discipline, who has created values, who has structured time, who has confronted mortality, who has become a force, now stands at a new precipice. Not the danger of weakness, the danger of pride, the seduction of superiority. When strength stabilizes, comparison may return, but inverted. Earlier, comparison produced resentment. Now it may produce superiority. I am more disciplined. I am more aware. I am stronger than they are. This thought feels justified. After all, growth required effort. But superiority is a subtle regression. Victimhood compares downward and blames upward. Arrogance compares upward and despises downward. Both remain dependent on others for identity. True strength does not require comparison at all. The illusion of finality. Another danger emerges, believing the journey is complete. I have transcended weakness. I understand. I am finished. This belief freezes growth. Strength is dynamic. The moment you assume completion, stagnation begins. Victimhood is static weakness. Arrogance is static strength. Both resist further evolution. The individual must remain unfinished. Consciously. The 14th lesson. Thus the 14th lesson becomes clear. Remain powerful, but stay aware. Awareness prevents rigidity. It allows correction without humiliation. It preserves growth beyond achievement. Power without awareness becomes tyranny. Awareness without power becomes fragility. The balance creates sustainable strength. The return of self-reflection. At this stage, self-reflection must deepen, not as self-doubt, but as calibration. Where am I becoming rigid? Where am I dismissing others too quickly? Where am I mistaking confidence for certainty? Strength requires continuous refinement. Humility is not weakness. It is openness to improvement. The strongest individuals are often the most adaptable, because they do not defend ego. They defend direction. The distinction between confidence and contempt. Confidence is quiet. Contempt is loud internally. Confidence says, I know my path. Contempt says, they are beneath me. The first builds. The second isolates. The individual who slips into contempt gradually loses clarity. He stops learning. He stops listening. He stops evolving. And stagnation returns in disguised form. Respect for struggle. One who has overcome victimhood should not despise those still caught in it. He remembers his own former state. He remembers fear. He remembers hesitation. He remembers resentment. This memory protects against cruelty. Strength that forgets struggle becomes harsh. Strength that remembers struggle remains grounded. Grounded strength influences more effectively than superiority. The responsibility of perspective. Perspective expands at higher levels. You begin to see complexity in others. You recognize that weakness often masks pain. That stagnation often masks confusion. That resentment often masks insecurity. This does not excuse destructive behavior, but it prevents unnecessary hostility. Victimhood reacts emotionally. Arrogance reacts dismissively. Balanced strength responds strategically. Growth beyond ego. Ego wants recognition. Ego wants status. Ego wants confirmation. True strength becomes indifferent to these. It seeks mastery, improvement, contribution. The focus shifts from identity performance to internal refinement. This reduces volatility. You no longer chase praise. You no longer fear criticism. You measure progress against your own standards. The discipline of listening. At high levels of development, listening becomes more powerful than speaking. You observe. You analyze. You adjust. Not to please, but to refine understanding. Listening prevents intellectual stagnation. It exposes blind spots. It protects against dogmatism. Dogmatism is weakness disguised as certainty. Flexibility anchored in principle is strength. The paradox of power. The more powerful you become internally, the less you need to prove it. The less you need to prove it, the more stable it becomes. Victimhood proves pain constantly. Arrogance proves strength constantly. Mature strength proves nothing. It simply acts. The integration of balance. Balance does not mean dilution. It means controlled intensity. You can be disciplined without becoming rigid. Confident without becoming dismissive. Ambitious without becoming obsessive. Independent without becoming isolated. This integration is advanced strength. It requires awareness of internal shifts. It requires correction without shame. It requires continuous recalibration. The silent authority. When power and humility coexist, authority becomes natural. Others feel safe yet challenged. Inspired yet respected. Strength without humility intimidates. Humility without strength dissolves. Together, they create gravity. The refinement continues. The journey does not end here. Because self-overcoming never ends. Each level reveals new blind spots. Each success introduces new temptation. Each achievement demands deeper awareness. The individual who understands this remains in motion. Not frantic. Not restless. But evolving. The final stabilization. Victimhood was fragile identity. Strength became constructed identity. Now identity becomes fluid yet anchored. Fluid in adaptation. Anchored in values. This is advanced sovereignty. You no longer fight weakness. You manage growth. You no longer escape limitation. You expand deliberately. You no longer seek validation. You seek refinement. Power without arrogance. Confidence without contempt. Authority without domination. Growth without stagnation. This is the stage where strength matures. And the individual who reaches it understands something profound. The greatest victory was never over others. It was over the temptation to stop growing. There is a moment when all fragments of growth must fuse. Responsibility alone is not enough. Discipline alone is not enough. Courage alone is not enough. Purpose alone is not enough. Strength becomes complete only when all lessons integrate into a single orientation of being. This is the stage of unified will. From fragmented effort to coherent direction. In earlier chapters, transformation happened in layers. Blame was replaced with responsibility. Fear was met with risk. Resentment dissolved into self-honesty. Chaos was endured. Values were constructed. Solitude was survived. Purpose was defined. Time was structured. Mortality was accepted. Humility balanced power. But unless these elements align, they remain separate tools. Unified will means no internal contradiction between values and action. No gap between declared standards and lived behavior. No split between ambition and discipline. When fragmentation ends, hesitation decreases. Energy concentrates. Identity stabilizes. The end of internal negotiation. Victimhood negotiates constantly. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe later. Maybe if circumstances improve. Fragmented strength negotiates as well. One part desires growth. Another seeks comfort. Unified will reduces negotiation. Direction becomes non-negotiable. This does not mean rigidity. It means clarity. When clarity exists, choices simplify. You do not argue with yourself about what matters. You act. The 15th lesson. Thus the 15th lesson emerges. Align thought, action, and identity into one direction. If you value discipline, live it. If you value courage, practice it. If you value growth, pursue it daily. Strength fractures when values remain theoretical. It consolidates when they become behavior. Unified will eliminate the distance between intention and execution. Energy without leakage. Fragmented individuals leak energy. They think one way, act another, and justify inconsistencies later. This creates internal tension. Unified individuals conserve energy. There is no need for self-justification. No need for defensive explanation. No need for constant internal argument. Energy flows toward construction. This creates momentum. And momentum creates confidence. The stability of identity. When will unifies, identity becomes stable. You are no longer defined by past injury, nor by temporary success, nor by external opinion. You are defined by direction. Direction organizes behavior. Behavior reinforces identity. Identity strengthens direction. This loop sustains growth. The silence of doubt. Doubt does not disappear entirely, but it loses dominance. When your actions consistently align with chosen values, doubt becomes informational rather than paralyzing. Victimhood amplifies doubt. Fragmented strength debates doubt. Unified will acknowledges doubt and proceeds. The difference lies in authority. Doubt no longer commands. It advises. And advice can be evaluated calmly. The integration of strength and flexibility. Unified will does not mean inflexibility. It means adaptable consistency. Your core values remain stable. Your methods adjust. You refine strategies without abandoning standards. You evolve without losing direction. This dynamic consistency allows continuous improvement. Victimhood clings to excuses. Arrogance clings to certainty. Unified strength clings only to growth. Living without inner division. Inner division drains vitality. When you promise yourself one thing and deliver another, self-trust erodes. When you repeatedly abandon commitments, identity weakens. Unified will restore self-trust. You begin to rely on yourself. You set a standard, and meet it. You adjust, but do not retreat. Self-trust becomes unshakable foundation. And foundation supports expansion. The rhythm of consistency. At this stage, life gains rhythm. Wake with purpose. Act with intention. Reflect without self-condemnation. Adjust without drama. No extremes. No collapse. No inflated highs or defeated lows. Consistency replaces volatility. And consistency compounds into mastery. The completion of the journey. The transformation from victim to strength is complete when you no longer search for someone to blame. You no longer fear risk. You no longer feed resentment. You no longer depend on validation. You no longer negotiate with comfort. You no longer fragment your will. Instead, you choose deliberately. You act consistently. You refine continuously. You build intentionally. This is unified will. The quiet sovereignty. Sovereignty is not domination. It is self-governance. The individual governs impulse, governs direction, governs interpretation. He no longer reacts automatically. He chooses consciously. And that conscious choice defines strength. Victimhood is unconscious reaction. Strength is deliberate authorship. Unified will is sustained authorship. Beyond the chapters. At this stage, the lessons no longer feel separate. They merge. Responsibility flows into discipline. Discipline flows into purpose. Purpose flows into consistency. Consistency flows into influence. Humility tempers power. Mortality sharpens urgency. Solitude refines clarity. Chaos fuels evolution. All elements support each other. Strength becomes ecosystem. The final recognition. The individual who has walked through these stages realizes something fundamental. There was never an external cage. There was interpretation. There was fear. There was resentment. There was avoidance. Remove them, and space appears. In that space, will operates freely, and free will directed consistently creates power. Victimhood was dependency. Strength is construction. Unified will is mastery. And mastery is not a moment. It is lived alignment. Every day, every choice, every action, there is one final threshold. Not responsibility. Not discipline. Not courage. Not even unified will. Something quieter. More refined. A state in which strength no longer feels like effort. It becomes nature. Up to this point, growth required confrontation, correction, resistance, endurance. Now it requires release. When struggle stops being central. In earlier stages, identity was shaped against something. Against injustice. Against fear. Against resentment. Against stagnation. Even strength was defined in opposition to weakness. But true transcendence arrives when opposition fades. You are no longer fighting victimhood. You are no longer proving strength. You are simply becoming. This shift is subtle but profound. The individual no longer sees life as a battlefield. He sees it as terrain. Terrain to explore. To shape. To expand within. The dissolution of internal resistance. When discipline has been practiced long enough, it becomes instinctive. When courage has been exercised long enough, fear loses authority. When responsibility has been embraced long enough, blame feels foreign. At this stage, effort transforms into flow. You no longer push yourself constantly. You operate in alignment naturally. Victimhood required justification. Strength required discipline. Transcendence requires integration. The 16th lesson. Thus the 16th lesson emerges. Do not cling even to the identity of being strong. Continue becoming. Attachment to identity, even a powerful one, creates rigidity. If you cling to, I am disciplined, you may resist flexibility. If you cling to, I am strong, you may deny vulnerability. If you cling to, I have overcome, you may resist further growth. True evolution requires looseness. You are not a fixed structure. You are a process. Strength without tension. Earlier, strength felt intense. Now it feels calm. You do not need to assert yourself constantly. You do not need to defend your direction aggressively. You act from clarity. This calm strength is difficult to destabilize. Because it is not reactive. It does not flare. It does not collapse. It moves. Steadily. Living as process. At this level, you no longer ask, how do I stop being a victim? Nor, how do I become strong? You ask, how do I deepen? How do I refine? How do I expand further? The questions evolve. Growth never ends. It only shifts dimension. Victimhood was about escape. Strength was about construction. Transcendence is about expansion without ceiling. The freedom of non-comparison. Comparison dissolves entirely. You do not measure yourself against others. You do not measure yourself against former weakness. You measure yourself against potential. Potential is limitless. This frees attention. Energy once used for comparison is redirected toward mastery. Mastery becomes art. Life becomes practice. The end of inner conflict. Inner conflict reduces dramatically. Values align with action. Action aligns with direction. Direction aligns with purpose. Purpose aligns with awareness of time. There is harmony. Not perfection, but coherence. Coherence produces peace. Peace produces clarity. Clarity produces precision. Precision produces effectiveness. Power without strain. There is a difference between force and power. Force strains. Power flows. Force tries to dominate. Power stabilizes naturally. At this stage, you no longer strain to appear confident. You no longer strain to suppress fear. You no longer strain to prove anything. Your actions speak. Your consistency speaks. Your direction speaks. This is matured strength. The expansion of perspective. Transcendence broadens perspective. You see long arcs. You see patterns. You see cycles of weakness and growth in others without contempt. You understand that development is layered. This understanding softens rigidity, but does not soften standards. You remain firm, but not harsh. Clear, but not narrow. Living intensely yet calmly. Intensity does not disappear. It refines. Instead of emotional volatility, there is focused energy. Instead of reactive urgency, there is deliberate acceleration. Instead of chaotic ambition, there is directed expansion. This state feels different. Not dramatic, not explosive, but deeply alive. Victimhood felt heavy. Early strength felt intense. Mature strength feels light. The horizon never ends. There is no final chapter in becoming. Each level reveals new blind spots. Each achievement introduces new challenges. Each mastery demands new humility. The individual who understands this remains curious. Curiosity prevents stagnation. Stagnation invites regression. Continuous refinement ensures vitality. The final recognition. At this stage, you recognize something essential. Strength was never about control over life. It was about control over interpretation. Life remains unpredictable. Circumstances fluctuate. Loss occurs. Change continues. But you remain steady. Because steadiness is internal. Victimhood was external dependency. Strength is internal authorship. Transcendence is effortless authorship. The quiet mastery. There is no applause at this level. No dramatic transformation scene. Just a person who acts deliberately. Who adapts intelligently. Who grows continuously. Who remains centered in chaos. Who does not collapse under pressure. Who does not inflate under praise. Who does not shrink under criticism. This is mastery of self. And mastery of self is the highest form of power. You began as someone reacting to life. You became someone shaping life. Now you are someone expanding within life. Not against it. Not from it. But through it. And the journey continues. Reaching strength is one thing. Remaining there is another. The higher a person rises internally, the more subtle the forces that attempt to pull him back. Not dramatic collapse. Not obvious weakness. But erosion. Slow. Quiet. Comfort disguised as reward. Approval disguised as validation. Fatigue disguised as wisdom. At this stage, the battle is no longer against fear or resentment. It is against regression. The gravity of comfort. After years of discipline, effort, and confrontation, the individual may feel entitled to ease. I have earned rest. I have proven myself. I can slow down now. Rest is necessary. But stagnation hides inside extended comfort. Growth requires friction. Without friction, sharpness dulls. Victimhood returns not through tragedy, but through softness. Habits loosen. Standards slip. Intensity fades. Not suddenly. Gradually. The 17th lesson begins here. Guard your standards more than your comfort. The subtle return of ego. As influence grows, recognition follows. Recognition tempts ego. Ego whispers, "You are different. You are above. You are beyond correction." This is the most dangerous illusion. Because ego blocks refinement. It resists feedback. It dismisses challenge. It protects identity instead of expanding it. Victimhood once relied on blame. Now regression may rely on pride. The mechanism is different. The dependency is the same. The discipline of renewal. Strength is not static. It requires renewal. Regular recalibration. Periodic discomfort. Intentional challenge. Without renewal, capability plateaus. Plateau leads to decline. The strong person deliberately seeks new resistance. New skills. New exposure. New environments. He does not wait for life to destabilize him. He destabilizes himself strategically. This prevents decay. The maintenance of awareness. Earlier stages required intense effort to build awareness. Now awareness must be maintained. Ask regularly, where am I drifting? Where have I become complacent? Where has discipline weakened subtly? Where has purpose blurred? These questions prevent unconscious slide. Victimhood begins unconsciously. Strength must remain conscious. The 17th lesson. Thus the 17th lesson becomes clear. Never assume stability guarantees permanence. Growth must be defended. Standards must be reinforced. Clarity must be revisited. The absence of visible weakness does not equal invulnerability. True strength anticipates erosion and counters it, avoiding intellectual stagnation. One form of regression is intellectual certainty. When you believe you fully understand, curiosity dies. Curiosity dying signals stagnation. Stagnation signals decline. The powerful remain students. Not insecurely, but deliberately. They refine ideas. They test assumptions. They welcome contradiction when it strengthens understanding. Rigid certainty mirrors fragility. Dynamic learning mirrors strength. Physical and mental decay. The body reflects the mind. Neglected discipline in one area spreads. Fatigue tolerated becomes habit. Excuses reappear subtly. Just this once. It doesn't matter. I deserve this. Repeated often enough, these phrases dismantle structure. The individual who once escaped victimhood must recognize these early. Small compromises accumulate. Small compromises compound. Guarding the height requires vigilance. Re-entering chaos intentionally. Earlier, chaos was endured. Now chaos must sometimes be chosen. Voluntary discomfort prevents involuntary collapse. New projects. New responsibilities. New physical demands. New intellectual challenges. These prevent stagnation. Comfort invites decay. Challenge renews vitality. Protecting purpose. Purpose can fade. Success can blur urgency. Achievement can reduce hunger. When hunger weakens, direction softens. Revisit purpose regularly. Why does this matter? What is the next horizon? What standard must rise? Without forward vision, momentum stalls. Without momentum, regression begins. The environment factor. Even strong individuals are influenced by environment. If surrounded by complacency, standards gradually align downward. If surrounded by ambition, standards align upward. The disciplined individual chooses environments carefully. He does not rely on willpower alone. He structures surroundings to support growth. Victimhood blames environment. Strength designs environment. Maintaining strength requires both internal discipline and external alignment. Fatigue and recovery. Guarding strength does not mean relentless strain. Exhaustion weakens clarity. Burnout erodes discipline. Recovery is strategic. Rest is structured. Renewal is intentional. The key difference lies in awareness. Rest serves growth. Complacency replaces it. Identity beyond achievement. One more subtle risk remains: over-identification with achievement. If identity rests solely on performance, failure destabilizes. True strength is not performance-based. It is value-based. Performance fluctuates. Values remain. When identity rests on internal standards rather than external results, setbacks do not fracture stability. They instruct. The height is not a destination. There is no final summit. Every height becomes plateau. Every plateau invites either decline or further ascent. The individual who understands this does not relax into permanence. He evolves. Continually. Calmly. Without panic. Without arrogance. The quiet vigilance. Guarding strength is quiet work. No audience. No applause. Daily reinforcement of habit. Daily clarity of direction. Daily alignment with values. The powerful person remains awake. Not anxious. Not tense. But attentive. Attention preserves structure. The enduring mind. At this stage, life no longer threatens identity easily. But subtle erosion must be prevented. Vigilance replaces struggle. Refinement replaces reconstruction. Expansion replaces escape. Victimhood required liberation. Strength required construction. Maintenance requires awareness. And awareness never sleeps entirely. You escaped weakness. You built power. Now you guard it. Not defensively, but deliberately. Because strength unguarded fades. And strength guarded compounds. There is a form of strength that is louder than all others. It acts quickly. It speaks decisively. It confronts immediately. But there is a higher form. It waits. By the time a person reaches this stage, he knows how to act. He knows how to endure. He knows how to build, confront, expand, discipline, and protect his standards. Now he must learn something more difficult. When not to act. The instinct to prove. Earlier in the journey, proving oneself was necessary. You proved you could take responsibility. You proved you could endure discomfort. You proved you could resist resentment. But proving easily becomes habit. Even when no proof is required. Someone challenges you, you respond immediately. Someone criticizes you, you defend quickly. Someone doubts you, you escalate effort. This reflex can become compulsion. Compulsion signals incomplete mastery. The strength of non-reaction. Victimhood reacts emotionally. Early strength reacts strategically. Mature strength does not always react at all. It evaluates. It measures significance. It considers consequence. It asks, does this deserve my energy? Will engagement expand me, or distract me? Is silence more powerful than response? Restraint is not weakness. It is precision. The 18th lesson? Thus the 18th lesson becomes clear. Master your impulses, even the impulse to demonstrate strength. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer need to correct every mistake in others. You no longer need to assert dominance. Selective action conserves energy. Energy conserved fuels higher construction. Victimhood wastes energy emotionally. Unrefined strength wastes energy aggressively. Wisdom directs energy intentionally. The economy of attention. Attention is currency. Where attention goes, growth follows. If you give attention to every minor conflict, you starve larger ambitions. If you react to every provocation, you fragment focus. The disciplined individual protects attention. He invests it where returns compound, not where ego flares. Restraint protects attention. Silence as authority. There is authority in silence. Not passive silence. Intentional silence. When you do not respond to provocation, you demonstrate stability. When you do not defend unnecessarily, you signal confidence. When you remain calm under accusation, you create psychological imbalance in aggressors. Silence forces others to confront themselves. Noise protects insecurity. Restraint exposes it. The power of delayed response. Immediate response satisfies emotion. Delayed response enhances clarity. Time introduces perspective. Perspective reduces impulsivity. The person who pauses before acting operates from awareness rather than reflex. Victimhood is reflex. Wisdom is pause. This pause prevents regret. It prevents escalation. It preserves structure. Not every battle matters. Strength earlier required confrontation. Now it requires discrimination. Which conflicts advance growth? Which conflicts drain energy? Which challenges refine skill? Which challenges merely inflate ego? The inability to differentiate creates exhaustion. The ability to differentiate creates leverage. Leverage multiplies effectiveness. Emotional control beyond suppression. Restraint is not emotional suppression. Suppression buries reaction. Restraint integrates it. You feel irritation, but do not act automatically. You feel anger, but evaluate context. You feel pride, but regulate expression. Control without awareness becomes rigidity. Awareness without control becomes volatility. Restraint balances both. The expansion of perspective. At this stage, you see long arcs. You understand that short-term victory may compromise long-term strategy. You recognize that not every misunderstanding requires correction. You accept that some people cannot understand your path. Clarity removes the urge to convince. Convincing often masks insecurity. True strength does not require conversion. It requires consistency. When action is necessary. Restraint does not mean passivity. When action aligns with values, it is decisive. When injustice demands response, it is firm. When growth requires confrontation, it is direct. The difference lies in control. You act because it is necessary, not because you were triggered. Victimhood is triggered. Wisdom is chosen. The discipline of letting go. Some arguments are endless. Some misunderstandings are permanent. Some people are unwilling to grow. Attempting to force change wastes life. Restraint includes letting go. Not from bitterness. From clarity. Energy redirected toward construction yields more impact than endless correction. The lightness of mastery. When restraint integrates fully, strength feels lighter. You do not carry tension constantly. You do not skin for threats obsessively. You move calmly. You conserve power. And because you conserve it, when you act, it carries weight. Rare action signals importance. Constant reaction signals instability. The transition to wisdom. At earlier stages, the journey was about building strength. Now it becomes about refining its application. Wisdom is applied strength. Strength is capacity. Wisdom is direction. Capacity without direction can become chaos. Direction without capacity becomes fantasy. Integrated, they create mastery. The reduction of ego noise. Restraint quiets internal noise. No need to respond instantly. No need to assert superiority. No need to correct constantly. Inner dialogue becomes calmer. Decisions become clearer. Emotional spikes reduce. Victimhood is loud internally. Wisdom is quiet. The emergence of strategic living. Life now feels strategic rather than reactive. You anticipate. You observe patterns. You act preemptively rather than defensively. This foresight multiplies effectiveness. Because you are not constantly recovering from emotional overreaction. You move ahead of conflict. Ahead of regression. Ahead of distraction. The quiet confidence. The strongest individuals often speak the least. They act when necessary. They withdraw when wise. They respond when strategic. They remain silent when irrelevant. This balance creates gravity. Others sense that when you move, it matters. And when you do not move, it is intentional. Strength taught you to act. Wisdom teaches you to choose. Victimhood reacted blindly. Early strength reacted boldly. Mature strength acts selectively. And selective action defines mastery. There is one final chain. Not fear. Not resentment. Not weakness. Not ego. Expectation. Even the strong can become prisoners of results. They act with discipline. They build with purpose. They guard their standards. They refine with awareness. But internally, something remains attached. What if this fails? What if this does not pay off? What if I lose what I built? This attachment creates tension. And tension reduces freedom. The invisible dependence. Victimhood depends on fairness. Early strength depends on progress. Advanced strength can begin to depend on outcome. Effort becomes tied to reward. Identity becomes tied to success. Stability becomes tied to achievement. This dependence is subtle. But it is powerful. Because when results fluctuate, as they always do, emotional balance fluctuates with them. Freedom disappears. Acting without guarantee. Life offers no guarantees. No guaranteed recognition. No guaranteed victory. No guaranteed permanence. If your willingness to act depends on guarantee, you are constrained. The strong must learn to act fully without certainty of reward. This is not indifference. It is commitment to process rather than result. The 19th lesson emerges here. Detach from outcome, but not from effort. The difference between commitment and attachment. Commitment is devotion to action. Attachment is emotional dependence on result. You can commit completely to a goal while remaining emotionally steady regardless of outcome. This steadiness is rare. It requires internal security. Victimhood collapses when outcomes disappoint. Ego-driven strength collapses when status drops. Mature strength adapts. If success comes, continue. If failure comes, refine. The direction remains. The power of process. When you focus on process, improvement continues regardless of external fluctuation. Process is controllable. Outcome is influenced by variables beyond control. Victimhood obsesses over uncontrollable variables. Strength maximizes controllable variables. Effort. Discipline. Learning. Adaptation. Detachment does not reduce intensity. It increases clarity. Because anxiety over results no longer clouds decision-making. Emotional stability in uncertainty. When you release dependence on results, emotional spikes reduce. Praise does not inflate you. Failure does not diminish you. You remain aligned with standards. This creates psychological resilience. It also increases effectiveness. Because desperation often leads to poor decisions. Calm persistence outperforms anxious urgency. The courage to risk loss. Detachment requires courage. You may lose status. You may lose recognition. You may lose material rewards. If identity is anchored in these, detachment feels threatening. But if identity is anchored in values and direction, loss becomes manageable. You are not what you achieved. You are how you act. This distinction liberates. Letting go of control illusion. Control is partial. You control effort. You do not control all consequences. Accepting this truth reduces frustration. Victimhood rages against uncontrollable forces. Mature strength acknowledges limits without surrendering effort. This creates strategic clarity. You invest where leverage exists. You release where leverage does not. The 19th lesson. Act fully. Release expectation. Continue regardless. This is freedom. When you no longer fear losing outcomes, you act more boldly. Because fear of loss restricts initiative. Fear of failure restricts creativity. Fear of rejection restricts authenticity. Detachment removes these constraints. Freedom from validation. Validation is outcome. Approval is outcome. Recognition is outcome. If you depend on these, your stability depends on others. When you detach, approval becomes pleasant, not necessary. Criticism becomes informative, not threatening. You remain centered. Victimhood demands sympathy. Ego demands admiration. Mature strength demands alignment. The joy of effort itself. At this stage, effort becomes intrinsically satisfying. Discipline is rewarding. Learning is energizing. Improvement is fulfilling. You no longer require external markers to justify action. Growth itself becomes reward. This creates sustainable motivation. Motivation based on reward fades when reward fluctuates. Motivation based on process persists. The reduction of fear. Much fear stems from imagined loss. If you accept loss as possible and survivable, fear weakens. You understand. I may fail and continue. I may lose and rebuild. I may fall and rise again. This internal security eliminates paralysis. You become fearless not because outcomes are certain, but because your stability does not depend on them. Acting as expression, not transaction. When detached, action becomes expression rather than transaction. You build because building aligns with your values. You speak because speaking aligns with your truth. You strive because striving aligns with your growth. Not because you are bargaining for reward. This transforms life. You are no longer negotiating with reality. You are participating in it. The lightness of freedom. Detachment creates lightness. You carry less tension. You sleep with less anxiety. You decide with less pressure. Because you have accepted uncertainty fully. This lightness increases creativity. Creativity requires psychological space. Attachment constricts. Detachment expands. The final liberation before completion. The journey began with escaping victimhood. It progressed through discipline, purpose, solitude, humility, restraint. Now it reaches near completion. You act without fear of outcome. You persist without guarantee. You build without desperation. You remain stable amid fluctuation. This is advanced freedom. Victimhood was chained to injustice. Early strength was chained to success. Mature strength is chained to nothing. It acts. It adapts. It continues. Regardless. There is no dramatic ending to this journey. No applause. No final declaration. No visible crown placed upon the head of the strong. What remains is something quieter. A way of living. The individual who once asked, "Why did this happen to me?" now asks, "What will I build next?" The one who once waited for fairness now acts regardless of it. The one who once defined himself by wounds now defines himself by will. The transformation is complete, not because struggle disappeared, but because identity changed. From reaction to creation. At the beginning, life was interpreted as something happening to you. Circumstances dictated mood. Criticism dictated confidence. Failure dictated identity. Now life is something happening through you. Events occur, you interpret. Challenges arise, you adapt. Loss happens, you reorganize. The shift is total. Victimhood was passive authorship. Strength is deliberate authorship. Sovereignty is continuous authorship. The integration of all lessons. Every stage of this journey now operates simultaneously. Responsibility remains foundation. Risk remains catalyst. Discipline remains structure. Chaos remains teacher. Values remain compass. Solitude remains purifier. Purpose remains engine. Time remains architect. Mortality remains clarifier. Humility remains stabilizer. Restraint remains regulator. Detachment remains liberator. Nothing is abandoned. Everything is integrated. Strength is no longer a series of techniques. It is a unified state. The absence of inner complaint. One quiet sign of sovereignty is the disappearance of internal complaint. The mind no longer rehearses injustice. It no longer narrates disadvantage constantly. It no longer exaggerates obstacles. This does not mean blindness to reality. It means refusal to dramatize it. Energy once consumed by complaint now fuels construction. And construction changes reality more effectively than outrage ever could. The freedom to choose meaning. Circumstances remain unpredictable. Pain still exists. Failure still occurs. Loss still touches life. But interpretation is chosen. You no longer interpret adversity as punishment. You interpret it as training. You no longer interpret criticism as attack. You interpret it as information. You no longer interpret uncertainty as threat. You interpret it as possibility. Meaning is no longer inherited. It is created deliberately. The calm presence. There is something unmistakable about a sovereign individual. Calm under pressure. Measured under praise. Steady under criticism. Decisive without haste. He does not rush to speak. He does not rush to defend. He does not rush to prove. His posture reflects internal alignment. His words reflect clarity. His actions reflect intention. This presence influences quietly. Living without apology. The sovereign individual does not apologize for ambition. He does not apologize for discipline. He does not apologize for independence. But he also does not impose them on others. He lives aligned. That alignment is enough. Victimhood seeks permission. Strength claims responsibility. Sovereignty requires neither permission nor validation. The unshakable core. At this final stage, identity rests on something immovable. Chosen values lived consistently. Because values are internal, they cannot be taken. Because discipline is habitual, it cannot be easily broken. Because purpose is clear, distraction loses power. Because detachment is practiced, outcome does not destabilize. This core remains stable even when circumstances shift violently. Fear revisited. Fear still appears. But it no longer commands. It informs. You acknowledge it. You evaluate it. You act anyway when necessary. Fear becomes advisor, not master. Victimhood was ruled by fear. Strength negotiated with fear. Sovereignty directs fear. The horizon ahead. The journey does not stop here. There will always be new ceilings. New blind spots. New challenges. But you no longer fear them. Growth is no longer threat. It is expectation. You seek challenge because challenge sharpens. You seek refinement because refinement expands. You seek intensity because intensity clarifies. Life becomes continuous elevation. The final lesson. The final lesson is simple, but it required everything before it. You are responsible for your interpretation, your effort, your standards, your direction. Nothing external can fully imprison you if interpretation remains yours. Nothing external can fully empower you if interpretation is surrendered. Sovereignty is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling your response to it. The end of the victim. The victim once believed, I am shaped by what happened. The sovereign knows, I am shaped by how I respond. The victim once waited. The sovereign acts. The victim once blamed. The sovereign builds. The victim once feared loss. The sovereign risks fully. The victim once sought sympathy. The sovereign seeks mastery. The architecture complete. What began as a reaction to weakness has become a philosophy of living. You no longer ask whether life is fair. You ask whether you are aligned. You no longer measure yourself by comparison. You measure yourself by integrity. You no longer seek safety first. You seek growth first. You no longer fear falling. You trust your ability to rise. A life chosen. There is no dramatic conclusion. Just a person waking each day with clarity. Acting with deliberation. Adjusting without panic. Persisting without bitterness. Living without apology. Growing without end. Victimhood was a story. Strength was a decision. Sovereignty is a lifestyle. And once you step into it, you do not return to smaller interpretations of yourself. You continue. Forward. Deliberately. Without excuse. Without resentment. Without fear.